Okay, well, welcome everyone to we do a webinar every month. Today we're going to talk about there were some pretty, I don't know, there's some pretty sizable or a good amount of SBA changes that occurred recently. And, we deal with a lot of people starting buying, selling, and that's going to impact the buyers, the starters, the sells, basically anyone who's going to have to get an SBA. So that's our primary thing. We were fortunate enough to have Greco, and I'll let him from Live Oak, let him introduce himself here shortly. We are recording this webinar. It will be posted to our website, social media. We'll email it out, etc. You can access it at any time. There is a Q&A down at the bottom, so if you have questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A. We'll do our best to answer them either as we go or at the end. So as I mentioned, I'll let Greco go ahead and introduce himself.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Owen, Tim, thanks a lot for having me back again. My name is Greco de Valencia. I'm the Senior Loan Officer and Vice President of the Pharmacy Vertical here at Live Oak Bank. Been with the bank for about 10 years now and been in the space for probably over 16, 17 years. And excited to talk about some of these changes. Always passionate about helping educate people so that they can make the right decisions.
Yeah, it's great. And I actually didn't introduce myself. I'm Owen Bondurant. I'm a partner at Independent RX with Tim Clark. Um, we are a company that helps people start and buy pharmacies. We do accounting and tax for pharmacies all over the country, and we help people sell pharmacies. So that's why we're into this uh, topic. And this is my business partner, Tim. And I'm introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Tim Clark, third generation pharmacist. Again, business partner with Owen and the consulting company IRX. We also still own a couple of pharmacies, a compounding pharmacy and long-term care pharmacy. My general task is to help people when they're looking at transitioning their business. Sometimes it's helping them with evaluation. Sometimes it's actually helping them sell. But everybody's at different stages, and that's what we try to figure out with them.
Yeah, great. So, our primary objective here is to go through SBA changes and talk about the effects of that and what it means to buyers and sellers, et cetera. So, Greg, I don't know if you want to give us just the background and maybe the high
Yeah.
level, and we'll probably have some questions.
Yeah, so effective a lot of these things that we're talking about are going to be effective June 1. Some things went into immediate effect on March 7th, but let's talk about the major things that I think are going to impact a lot of people, whether they're looking to start or buy. The major change that the SBA did was go back to some equity injection requirements. Specifically, in the prior state, they were making a little bit more lenient, I would say, flexible down payment options. And I know Owen, Tim, we did a webinar back then, I would say year and a half, 2 years ago, when they had kind of changed to some of these more flexible options, which was I felt really good in our industry. And so they're going back to a former state where they're formalizing those a little bit more, making them a little clearer. So not, some people are saying not as flexible. I just like to call that it's a little more clear, right? On exactly what it is. And the two pieces that they've talked about is on startups. So startup acquisition, startup pharmacies. They are going back to the requirement of a 10% equity injection. And for purchases, acquisitions, they are returning back to a 10% equity injection, but the rules there are that the buyer has to have a minimum of half the down payment. And if the seller is going to make up any of the portion of the down payment, it has to be no greater than 5%, and that amount has to be on standby for the life of the loan. So let's put that into some practical terms here. So let's say I have a project cost of $1 million, 10% equity requirement injections there, 10% for an acquisition. That would be 100 grand. If I'm looking to buy that business, I have to have at least $50,000. And if the seller's going to carry the other half, 50,000, it's going to be on standby for the full life of the loan. That means interest can accrue, but no principal or interest payments can be made. So that's a pretty significant one that they put in. In addition to if you're doing a startup, prior state, they said that maybe you could do it without any down payment. They're changing that 10% equity requirement there. So whatever your project cost is. Those are some major things that are impacting on the buy side. We could definitely talk about some other areas in addition to that, but that's one big one.
A couple questions for you on standby, that just to clarify, that means if the loan is 10 years, no payments of principal interest can be made for that 10 years.
That
Correct.
is correct.
Okay.
Yep, that is correct. That is
Yeah.
correct. And I know that can often kind of get confused a little bit because some people will say, well, the seller's willing to participate, or sellers may say, well, yeah, I'm okay carrying some paper. Well, in what form is that going to matter? So it is important for sellers today and buyers to also have a really good idea about how much equity in the form of cash that they're going to have to put down towards the project. And it's even more critical now if they're going to go through SBA lending, or if they're going to go through any kind of lending. You always want to understand what are the down payment requirements, but in SBA, the minimum is going to be 10%. So it's very important to understand, hey, as a buyer, as a seller, whoever I'm selling the business to, how much cash do they have, and what's my appetite to help if I need to make up a portion of the equity injection. Now, of course, if a buyer has 10% and the seller wants to carry another 10 or 20% for whatever reason it may be, those rules aren't touched. Those are still there, and you can operate as normal so long as the cash flow in the bank agrees to the terms. But with regards to equity injection, that's a pretty big one.
And along the lines of equity injection, is the expansion loan requirement, are those still out there or have they changed
Yeah.
those? I know
Yeah.
they're a little technical, but
Yeah, no, I think that's an important thing because that's been a popular one, right? I think more and more people have understood about that expansion rule. So what the SBA did was they essentially they had said that you can do an expansion loan where possibly there may not be an equity injection requirement if you meet certain standards, and then any equity that's brought in can be viewed as a contribution. But what they did say is now it has to have the same exact NAICS code, which if you're a pharmacist buying another pharmacy, that's not a problem.
right.
But there has to be within the same geographic region. Now that's what's
That's
tripping
right.
up a lot of people. And a lot of people are forgetting that geographic region. Now that means, for instance, I'm in California. Well, does that mean Northern California, Southern California? Is that the same geographic region? Probably not. Or is it going to be Southern California? Okay, well, that might be the same geographic region. So it is important to understand and be aware and have those meaningful conversations with the bank if that's a route that you're looking to do.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's certainly probably the biggest change, correct? The
Well,
well, okay,
I,
well, let's
I'd,
move on to the next one.
I'd love to say that was it and kind of go, great, let's talk about the rest of the
Okay.
things. But no, so another thing that they changed, which I have to be honest with everybody, I'm a little disappointed about, was how partner buy-ins are done. So in prior state, they had actually changed to where they were allowing partner buy-ins. And again, Owen, we did a webinar series where we talked about
Yeah,
that. And I thought it was a very good thing for a lot of individuals who it was a first step into ownership, right?
yeah.
Well, now they're changing this a little bit. So they are allowing for partner buy-ins, but what they are saying is that the owner, so let's say I own a pharmacy, right? 100%. Oh, and you're purchasing in, okay?
Hmm.
If you purchase in below 20%, so let's say it's 85-15, okay? You're buying 15, or I'm sorry, you're buying 85, I'm retaining 15. I'm going to have to be a guarantor on the loan for a period of 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Now that wasn't how it was prior.
Yeah.
Now there's still some conversations going on about, well, what does that mean? Is there a burn off period? when do you get released? How do you get released? What exactly is involved in guaranteeing the loan? Does that mean that my personal assets are involved in that? So those things are still getting worked out because when they released that, a lot of banks understandably came back with a lot of questions. But the fact of the matter is how they have it is, yeah. So if that existing owner is retaining below 20%, they're going to have to guarantee the loan for 2 years. Now, if they're retaining greater than 20%, they have to be a full guarantor for the life of the loan. That really is something that they didn't touch, but that sub 20 is something that they
Yeah.
changed. So that's caused a little bit of some um, pause for reconsideration and understanding with people who were going through the potential opportunity of going through a partner buyout, which again, you can look at it as a staged, phase into ownership. They're hitting the pause button just to kind of understand what that's going to look like. Another thing that the SBA changed, which was in prior state, was they had allowed previously for some rollover equity. So meaning essentially you can do a restructure through an asset purchase. They took that completely away.
Mhm.
That wasn't one as popular because you see that a little bit more in some private equity or in some of the larger transactions, but there were some larger long-term care, larger
Yeah.
specialty ones that were pursuing that type of structure. And unfortunately, now you can't do that. And then the last thing that they changed with regards to partner buyouts is essentially if there's any boats rising during that partner buyout. So let's say you, Tim, myself are all owning a business. You guys are buying me out. I'm leaving. If anybody's equity raises, even by one, tenth of a percent, everybody is a guarantor on the loan. So that's another
Yeah.
thing to consider. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and I know it's a lot, so I don't expect anybody to really kind of on this webinar go like, okay, I got it all. You can have more meaningful conversations with the bank, but I think really what it highlights is if sellers or buyers are in the process of structuring a purchase, they need to understand how these changes could change things. It may not at all, but there are going to be some changes effective June 1.
Is there still opportunity, Greco, for refinancing?
Yes, yeah. So they didn't touch the refinancing too much. They did make it where if you're going to refinance any MCA merchant cash advances, that's going to be deemed ineligible. I don't see that too much in the pharmacy space, and honestly, I think we would all agree here that you want to try to avoid those merchant cash advances as much as you can because they're not very favorable. But that was something that was touched. But the refinance, they kept pretty much same is. So if you're refinancing seller debt, it has to have 2 years of on-time repayment. If you're financing any conventional debt, 1 year of on-time repayment, and then the rest is pretty there, making sure that you still save the borrower 10% on monthly payments and making sure that there's, a just reason for doing the refinance.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Uh, what else you got?
Well, they did make some changes as well as far as sourcing of equity requirements. So this is a big one that a lot of people do. So let's going back to my example of I'm buying a pharmacy, and I need $50,000 or $100,000 to make up my down payment. A lot of people, especially because of rising home values, they've got some equity in their homes and they're looking at, well, okay, I may tap into a home equity line of credit to support my down payment. So in the previous, that's now going to be changing, there wasn't really any rules around sourcing that the banks had to look to. Well, what they're doing is they're returning to an old rule now where they're stating that basically you have to be able to show that there's some outside income to support that home equity line of credit that's not coming from the target business. So what that means in practical terms is this. So let's say that I'm taking out a home equity line of credit. That amount's going to be $1,000 a month. Okay. And I'm buying a pharmacy and I'm going to take a salary from that pharmacy as a new owner. Well, that $1,000 a month that I'm going to have to pay to my mortgage lender on the home equity line of credit can't come from the income that I'm going to earn from this business. So what does that have to come from? It has to come from either outside income from another business or perhaps a spouse or some other form of outside income. And that's something that a lot of buyers have to really make sure that they're understanding as it relates to taking out that home equity line of
Yeah.
credit if that's something that they're going to do. So again, just reason for if you're planning those types of things, have those meaningful conversations with the bank, especially if you're going to be going through some SBA lending.
Yeah. Any other changes to sourcing cash?
Yeah, I mean they are they're making some things where they're going to go back to sourcing as far as where some of the equity injection might be coming from, but nothing really material. Gifts are still allowed. Um, but you always want to make sure that you're going to have some good conversations with where seasoning, where it's coming from to make sure that it's not an ineligible. I think the biggest thing is going to be those borrowed funds. That's a big one.
Okay. Okay. Um, Others?
Yeah, there is one other one that
Okay.
was actually implemented starting March 7th. It was a pretty big directive that came out of the SBA, caught a lot of people by surprise because they made it effective immediate. And it has to do around beneficial ownership. And essentially what it is they're saying that, hey, listen, to qualify for SBA lending, 100% of the borrowers need to be either a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident. And so, sometimes that can impact some people's abilities depending on how they're structuring transactions. So that's a big one, but that's now in effect March 7th. And most people, if they're going through some financing now with banks, those questions are being asked in the applications. And then there's obviously some requirements that the bank will go through with verifying citizenship and things like that. But that was a big one that came out.
Yeah. Because it used
And
to be
now,
49%, right?
yeah, there were some things where
Yeah.
sometimes if someone had like someone on a visa, let's say they were working as a pharmacist and they're going to be an owner, there were some rules around there, ways to make that function work. Where if you were perhaps 51%, or you could reasonably prove that you could operate the business, if that visa holder were for some reason not able to work in the business anymore, but now
Mm.
they removed that completely. So 100% U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident.
Okay. Yeah. Any other rules around that? Um,
No,
just that's it. Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That's the
Yeah,
biggest one.
that's a pretty big change because there's a good amount of
Yeah,
people who would partner.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we see it.
Yeah.
We see it quite a bit. So, and it's just important too for people to understand that, if you're talking to a bank and you may be pursuing SBA financing, they don't really know yet. It's a standard question that probably is going to come up a little bit more. U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident. What's the ownership structure of everything? So it's important to know those things.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Any big changes on the horizon over the next 6 months on fees and rates?
Yeah, I mean that's been a big question. So on the fees side, they did make some changes to fees that were loans below 1 million. They're returning to some fees that were there prior. They did not have fees associated, SBA guarantee fees associated with loans under $1 million. They're returning to that fee structure. 1 million and above really wasn't impacted. And I'll be honest with you, a majority of the acquisition deals that we see, it's going to be north of that $1 million loan amount when you factor in buying a business plus working capital. On the rates, I mean, taking my banker hat off here and maybe looking at it just more broadly from reading what I see, it's a tough situation right now. I think the feds know, and I encourage everybody, there's so much information out
Oh,
there that you
much.
can look. Yeah. I think the word uncertainty in the latest Fed minutes, I think showed up something like 17 times or something like that. So I think, rates are probably going to stay where they are for
Yeah.
2025. They could stay even there for 2026. It's hard to say, I just think that they're in a difficult situation right now because, you know, is inflation completely behind us? I personally don't think so. And I don't think
So yeah.
they fully believe that yet either. I know that, the impact of the tariffs are on everybody's minds. whether you're just buying goods from a store or whether you're running a business. We'll see how that plays out as well, given especially now that the latest ruling from the
Years.
from the court
Yeah.
said that, yeah, that you can't do that. They're going to appeal it. So I have a feeling right now that people need to just kind of accept that, where we're at with rates is probably where the new norm is for the time being, which is going to impact things, right? Because if people took out a loan in 2021 when rates were at rock bottom and then they went through the hockey stick rise and we're waiting, where's it going to go? Is it going to slip a little, which it has in the
Yeah.
last year, but is it going to slip more? We don't really know yet. So that comes into consideration too when you're looking at total debt. If you're taking it out for a project, doesn't matter if you're buying, starting, purchasing a real estate, whatever it is, that's a factor that does need to come out there.
Yeah. Historically, and I think you and I may have even talked about this in a webinar once. Um, I mean, historically, yeah, the Federal, if in times when they're uncertain, they just hold. And that's what they do. If you look at economic history, but also from a rate perspective, I think you and I looked at this one time, like we looked from like the 70s all the way up to now. The current rates actually aren't god awful compared to
Yeah,
history.
historically. Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
I,
I know
I, I
it
think,
feels bad because
yeah,
from 2008 to 2020, it was like the most ridiculous interest rate period of history. But
yeah.
in if you look over 100 years, it's actually not terrible. Uh,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like the price of gas, right? I mean, talk to
yeah,
some people and they're like, man, gas used to be 79 cents. And you talk to some people, I remember when it shot up and now it's high. So you're right, though. Historically, I think rates are still in not the highest, not the
yeah,
lowest. They're kind of like in this
middle
normal
range.
pattern area, but it's difficult because we went through such a period of really low interest rates where prime was at one point prime was at 3.25, you
Yeah,
know. I
which
mean,
is
now it's at seven
ridiculous.
and a half. I mean, so
Yeah,
it's and then the bank will always put a spread on it depending on the risk of the loan and the strength of the borrower. So um I can understand where people were still kind of feeling that,
yeah, oh, yeah.
it might be high, but you're right. Historically speaking, it's still pretty low.
Greco, what sort of like over the last couple months, what sort of rates are you seeing out there that are being offered to deals? Like what's kind of a range?
Yeah, I would say prime plus two is still pretty the standard for most SBA lenders. I think a lot of that, whether it drops down a quarter or raises up a quarter there is really going to depend a lot on the strength of the borrower, the strength of the deal. At the end of the day, pharmacy lending, a lot has to do with um, when it comes to an acquisition is that risk of transition and whether or not the performance of the business is consistent and whether or not it can continue, and so that transition risk is really critical. So that needs to be always addressed. And then of course, the proper capitalization of the business as well, the ability of the new owner to step in and have a good idea about what they're going to do. I just think in today's world, just filling prescriptions and relying on reimbursements is hard. And so you have to be able to have ideas about what you're going to do, whether it's going to be, pursuing LTC at home, pursuing cash-based models, compounding, diversifying into some other areas in the business, um, managing your purchases, right? Understanding your purchase contracts. So all those types of things come into it, which is a lot of the expectation of the new owners, and that's going to play into that risk profile.
And if I'm buying a store, what I've got to prove to you is I've got cash flow to pay you back, right?
Yeah,
And I've got to provide enough spread for you in the bank to feel comfortable with me as the borrower. That's
yeah,
and if someone like typically I'm dealing with people who are selling, so what you know I'm kind of telling them, I think it's the same thing as you. Like right now, the market is kind of in a flux.
yeah,
we're definitely, and I don't know if you agree or disagree, but I feel we're kind of at a low point in terms of pricing. As valuations are fairly low unless we're looking at compounding long-term care, different profitability segments that are better than traditional retail. Traditional retail is just really difficult right now. And like, do you have any advice to those in the business that are looking to
Yeah,
sell it?
yeah. I mean, it is. I do agree with you on the low point. I mean, I think the hard thing is right now, Rite Aid's out of the game as far as purchasing goes. CVS, to my
Ugh.
understanding, kind of hit pause a little
Yeah,
bit, right?
we've been told
They're
pause.
out of the game for 6 months, Greco.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
to
So
maybe till beginning of the year, though they might reengage like with offers in November.
yeah. So then then you've got obviously independent buyers, and then you've got this kind of fourth group that's out there, be it hospitals buying or private equity, whatever that may be,
Grocery
right?
stores,
Grocery stores, yeah, that type of
like
thing. So
regionally.
yeah.
Yeah.
So and I think the other tough thing is unless you're in a state that's had some pretty significant Medicaid or legislative reform, you know, the margin per script is just low right now. It's just low. And so I think what is happening is if you're trying to sell but you're going to be asking for something that is, not matching up, unfortunately, with the performance of the business. And then you're left with really, one or two buckets of buyers. Well, what is it that the person is going to be able to pay and what are they going to be able to get financed? And I think that's what sellers have to have a very strong, good conversation with people like yourselves, Tim, on what the realistic thing is and what changes can be done. And is now the right time or is it later? And another thing we're seeing too is some people are in the process of selling and these Rite Aid closures have come out of nowhere and now they're gaining a lot of prescriptions from it. Well, what does that mean as far as, what kind of scripts are
Valuation.
they?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How does that impact the valuation? How does that impact the cash flow of the business? How's that going to impact the staffing and the capital requirements for the new owner? So,
Well,
all
I
those
can
things.
answer that really quickly. I mean, you go get a bunch of Rite Aid business, you're in a cash crunch. I mean,
Yeah,
any time your traditional retail business comes in now, that now my cycle is messed up because I've got to pay my wholesaler quicker than I get the money in from the third party. My staff gets more stress, and I've got to add more staff that's maybe untrained. And the fact when you're bringing in new business, I don't know the patient, so it's just harder to take care of new business.
yeah.
So it's a divergence of a lot of stuff that's I mean, I can't, like, if I was advising someone who's going through a transition of getting all this business from Rite Aid, I don't know if I tell them their business is worth any more right now.
Yeah, it's true. I
I
mean,
mean, I
it's
don't, because, like, okay, I don't myself, that's gonna be hard. Like,
yeah,
there's an unknown. It's a good unknown that, yes, I'm going to get customers and I can weed through them, but there's definitely work to be done to absorb this.
yeah, and it's not every prescription and profile are created equal, and we're seeing where I mean I hate to say that,
Yes,
but it's
very,
true. I
very
mean,
well. You need
That's
a
yeah,
true.
t-shirt. That's a
yeah, and
t-shirt.
and, and I do think there's some I'm excited by the fact that there are some if it can be done, right? Because everything requires a little bit of work, but we've had some pretty good experiences lately with people who are purchase stores at a fair price where they weren't over leveraged day one, and they had some really good ideas, and they've been implementing them, and they've been able to increase profit per script, which we have that conversation a lot with people, and sometimes if it can't be done, it just can't be done. Well, then okay, we need to purchase the pharmacy then at a reasonable
Yeah.
price and debt load for what the performance of the business is today, because that impacts the future earnings of it. If there's nothing really to increase, and if anything, it's going to decrease, that can harm things.
Yeah, I totally agree, Greco. We're seeing the same thing. Like, you know, first off, sellers have to be realistic with their price if they're not going to make changes, or they need to make changes, wait, and sell it for the changes that the buyer was going to make.
Yeah.
And we are see people come in and make good improvements to the business because I think more than ever before, a single location can do more. Like when Tim was first in this and he grew to whatever 30 locations, the only way for us to make more money was to add prescriptions. Now you can take one location and you can do compounding. You can do compounding through 503Bs without ever even adding a compounding lab. You can do long-term care. You can do clinical services. You can do point of care testing. There's all these different things. There's travel vaccines. There's regular vaccines. There's vaccines in facilities. Like
Yeah.
there's just all this stuff that, you can take your current patient base, add patients, and sell more to the
Yeah.
patients. So, you know, it certainly is an interesting time because if you can buy it at the right price, you can turn something into there's a lot of potential in these stores because some
And,
of these changes are difficult. It's not
and
adding scripts.
and I think, Owen, one of the big things, I mean, like Owen and I both started like being, clerks in a store, right? And filling prescriptions, and I was a pharmacist. But to be honest, that job isn't all that. I mean, the fun thing is getting to know your patients and the business of it, and that has its good stuff. But what's available now for a professional pharmacist to make money are professional things that you can feel good about. If you're not making money doing it, you don't feel good about it, so stop doing them. So it's really a talk you have to have with yourself professionally. What do I want to do? If I want to coast and just do this, this is what I'm going to get. But unless you change, unless you adapt, that's what we all get.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. And one thing too, we're open for business to do some creative structures with existing owners who are looking to purchase underperforming stores. And if they have a track record of making things perform, you know, there's opportunity there. Now, obviously, you still don't want to put someone in a situation where, they're
Yeah.
just grossly overpaying for a business that's not performing. But there is that openness there. And I do feel like for the right people in the right situations,
Yeah.
there's opportunity for growth there because not everybody is lucky to sometimes be in a state where, hey, my Medicaid pays me great, and I'm buying a store that's 75% Medicaid. And oh, by the way, they also do some long-term care at home. And oh, by the way, they also do some compounding, and my margin that I'm buying there is going to be 26% gross margin and operating expenses 20. I've got some stuff to work with. Not everybody has that situation.
Right.
Great if that's what you're buying. But
So,
also,
so go
but
ahead.
also the one thing to point out, I don't really know what the impacts of these Medicaid cuts that are in this
Yeah.
bill that might get past the Senate. I don't know how that's going to impact a lot of Medicaid funding on the prescription side for a lot of states.
Yeah.
Difficult to say.
I can't tell if it's good or bad.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a little hard to to tell, but
Greco, if I'm a pharmacy owner and let's say I'm in a town and there's, let's say, three or four or five other independents, and hey, I'm doing pretty well, and I listen to you here now, and now I start to get that idea. Well, maybe I could be maybe not a multi-store owner, but maybe I do just go get a loan to absorb that guy's business, bring it into mine,
Hmm.
because now even though he doesn't have this good business, I've got a good business, but as long as I go by that fairly, maybe I can get a loan. I mean, I can just like have a call with the bank and I don't know what I'll call it, spitball scenarios of how to start looking for those opportunities. Can I?
Yeah, we can definitely sketch it out. I mean, a lot of people, especially if you're an existing owner, you're going to have some existing financials, and there's a good idea about what you can take on as a debt load. And also, it's important to point out too, our Live Oak Express product, which is intended for anything 500 and below, that's also a good option for people if you're buying a lower script or lower store, moving it into yours. Maybe you're buying a smaller one and you've got some good performance and there's a way to structure that. Not everything is always going to be $1 million, $2 million transaction. So that is out there too. And especially, with the Rite Aid closures, if there's a need for working capital, that Live Oak Express opportunity is there too for loans 350 and below. And then of course, 0 to 350, 350 to 500, those two areas our Live Oak Express team is looking at.
Would those be like an SBA sort of package too, Greco?
Yeah, 0 to 350 would be one type, 350 to
Okay.
500 would be another.
Okay. Get some water.
We're just peppering you with questions.
Man,
You either I think you got some grass in your throat from playing golf this morning. You're damn 82.
Uh,
Yeah, but that's I mean, I'm excited for this season. I know trade show season is upon us, right? I mean, the big three are coming
yep.
up. I'm excited to see kind of what the vibe is going into things. Excited to have some good conversations with people about where their business is heading, plans that they're having. And also, I encourage everybody, stop by the different various booths that are there, educate yourselves on what are some things that can be done either from the prescription side or maybe from the the a clinical services side, but also stop in, refresh with your pharmacy software system. I mean, I know a lot of people have become very, very savvy with their pharmacy software system to be able to identify those profiles, understand, hey, where do we want to operate? Where's our sweet spot? And that's something that I think people, obviously should take advantage of.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you got to really look at technology. I think I mean, maybe over the last 2 years, the technology has gotten to the point within pharmacy that it's really starting to make an impact on efficiency and like reducing costs or increasing sales. I always struggled previous to that, in certain situations it would work or, but now like the text messaging, I mean, there's some automation to do data entry. There's, even some of the pill counting and the pharmacy automation, some of that stuff you can get a smaller one for much cheaper. It used to be, you had to get the big thing and it was 300 grand. Well, now you can get something that fits your business and it can replace a tech or cause you not to hire someone. Like there's a lot more technology out there than there was even 5 years ago, and the stuff works and it actually makes an impact. It's amazing, like when we put text messaging in, the amount of less phone calls. I mean, it's just, you know, and when you're not on the phone, you can be doing a lot. So you should spend some time because things are evolving quickly. And
And
you got
also,
to stay out ahead of that.
I'm going to be doing when I'm there is talking to some of the wholesalers about, how does this transparency or how does the Trump passed rule on clearer pricing for branded
Oh yeah.
medications, how's that going to impact things? I mean, I know there's been some posts on LinkedIn talking a little bit about that. I definitely want to understand that. I want to understand, more about some of the potential impacts on legislative moves with regarding to PBMs.
Yeah.
Where's that going to go?
Yeah, no, and there's a lot of them right now. Ohio's got one, Iowa has one, Alabama's about to pass one. There's more of them than ever, and
Yeah.
really understanding what those are and what they're going to do to your business Um, I mean, it's important
Yeah.
because
It's
it's
it
making a big change. I mean, for the people who, those states where they've made that impact, I mean, you know, you, we collect a lot of data from a lot of pharmacies, and there's a clear difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're a seller and you're attending the trade show this year, stop by our booth and understand more about how these potential SBA changes could be impacting a potential buyer or a deal that you're looking to do in 2026. Because I don't think they're going to make changes again. The
Okay.
last rules were in place for probably almost about 3 years, almost 4 years, about that. And so, I don't feel like they're going to be making any additional changes. They may be making some clarifications, but at the end of the day, this isn't a big response from the SBA because they were seeing some rising defaults, not necessarily in the pharmacy world. Obviously, we understand there's challenges there, right, with store closures, mostly directly related to reimbursements, which I hope gets addressed. I know NCPA's really spearheading that.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
But the SBA more broadly looked across most of the loans and saw that, hey, defaults were on the rise. There's been a lot of discussions about why that is. I think a lot of it has to do with some of the COVID related subsidies that were out there that finally tapered off, and you had what some people are calling zombie businesses that
Mm.
just really couldn't sustain themselves. So then you started to see a lot of defaults. So the SBA, in response to that, they went back to some of these more clearer rules for people
And
in their response. And so I don't think that's going to change, but I say all that because it is important now for sellers to really have a good idea about, hey, what am I looking at when I'm trying to sell this? What are my impacts? What are my options for buyers? So they can have a good understanding. They're not caught by surprise.
yeah, no, and I think it's important the word understanding because this is not something you can't overcome. Like these were the old rules. Like I kind of started doing this back, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 years ago, and this was just the standard rule at that time and was for quite a few years up until actually more recently. So people who are doing hundreds of loans like this isn't like you can't get a loan. They're not stopping people from getting loans. They're just making
No.
it a bit more clear and probably actually safer for the borrower and making sure the borrower um, is definitely qualified. And understanding those rules allows you to find, or us or whoever to find better buyers for you.
Yeah.
That's all.
We had a question in the
Yeah.
chat. Um,
It says, I'm a new owner. How much time does SBA require for me to borrow additional capital for another project? Uh, um,
well, I mean, the short answer is it depends on what that other project is. It's all, I mean, if you're, yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, you have to, it depends. Um, I think what most banks, and I'm going to speak broader from a banking standpoint, most banks are going to want to see, on that existing project that you've done, since you're a new owner, do you have at least a year of financials under your belt? Do you have a tax return? Or is it that you only have 3 to 6 months? So that's going to play into it. I think the golden rule is always at least 1 year of financials under your belt on your current project and before you get capital into another one. But again, it really depends on what that project is. So
yeah, and
um
buying another store also is that cash flows probably helps.
yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, the devil's in the details always. I mean, so
Yeah,
it just really depends, but usually the golden rule is about a year.
yeah, that's good. We actually have another one. It says, what conferences are you referring to when and where? So it's summer, and every summer the big three wholesalers, McKesson, Cardinal, and Amerisource, have a trade show. Greg, you may have to help me out a little bit. McKesson has something called Idea Share. That one is in July, I believe, in Nashville, Tennessee. Cardinal is in Denver, but I'm not 100% sure when. And then Amerisource has ThoughtSpot, which
Yeah, they're in Vegas.
are in
Of course I remember that one. Yeah, ThoughtSpot's in Vegas.
Yeah.
Cardinals in Denver, and McKesson is in Nashville.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it goes McKesson first, then Cardinal, then
And,
Amerisource.
and it's like
Um,
back to back to back
yeah,
weeks.
back to back.
Yeah.
Those are the three big ones. But then of course NCPA ownership has theirs. NCPA has theirs nearing the end of the summer
Yeah.
in that September October time. And then, there's a whole host of maybe smaller
We're,
ones that are around that could be
yeah,
out there.
we're
But
we're going to Pioneer next week.
there you go. There's a big
They
one.
have one Pioneer slash QS1 now. It's a red sale
Yeah, yeah,
um, uh, conference. So there's a few dotted ones. Like PCCA has one in I think
yep.
October, November.
October, yep,
Yeah. So there, some of the buying groups have different ones. I think Northwest is coming up. So,
yeah,
but the ones we were referring to were the big three, which outside of NCPA are probably the biggest trade shows.
yeah, yeah.
We do encourage people to try to get to a trade show annually if you can, for all the reasons that Greco was talking about. Talk to vendors, talk to, other owners, talk to wholesalers. Like, that knowledge allows you to kind of shift and pivot your business.
Yeah, I mean,
Definitely helpful.
networking with your peers is like critical. I mean, I've got a new owner. She purchased a store at the beginning of the year up in the Northeast, and she's doing great, doing some good things. But she told me all the time, she's like, I'm part of a big Northeast Facebook group. She asked me, "Hey, can I meet some other?" She happens to be a female owner. She's like, Can you introduce me some other female owners that I can network with, bounce ideas off of?" And I think that's the lost thing that can happen at some of those trade shows. Obviously some wholesalers tie things to rebates, some don't. Obviously you maybe use it as a chance to take the kids and all that type of stuff. But it's that opportunity to network too with other owners. What are you seeing? What am I doing? Or am I on the right path? That was actually one thing that one owner told me. He's like, I just want to make sure, am I doing this? Are people seeing the same things that I'm seeing? Is everybody agree? Like, am I completely off here? And I think that's an important thing to do, in addition to talking to the banks, talking to Live Oak, understanding, hey, here's my plan, here's what I want to do. Where do I fall in this? Is my transition plan realistic or is it not? Um, those are all meaningful conversations. And you don't have to wait for the trade show to do that. People can find me online, they can find me via LinkedIn. We can always have this conversation one-on-one, but I know life gets busy for everybody, and especially if you're in a store where you're all of a sudden picked up a ton of Rite Aid stuff, you're probably swimming in it. So
Yeah, no, you're right, Grego. I hear from a lot of newer or not quite owners. Oh, well, I mean, other owners will talk to me.
yeah,
I mean, they'll let you come
imagine that.
visit their store. I mean, as long as you're not opening across the street from
Yeah,
them, they're usually pretty open and want to share, what they've learned and what they've done. So
yeah,
the trade shows are a great way to start networking and doing that, or at least meeting vendors who can introduce you to people. So
yeah.
I think that's pretty much everything. Any parting words? Anything else to add?
No, just, I want to thank everybody. Thank you again, Owen, Tim, for having me on. I know pharmacy is a very fluid industry. I know there's a lot of challenges, still a lot of opportunities, and we're always here to help assist people answer questions free of charge. And look forward to seeing everybody hopefully in person.
Yeah. What's the best way for them to reach you?
You can contact me through, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat here. Um, Type my email address in. That's probably the best way. You can also go on our website and look up how to contact a lender there, and we'll be able to help people.
Great. That's fantastic. Yeah, thanks for getting on again, Greco. We always appreciate it. If you need to reach us, our website's independentrxconsulting.com. You can actually schedule a call with Tim or I right on the website there. And this video will be back up there. We've recorded it, we'll share it, And thanks everyone for joining. We'll have another webinar sometime in June. It's usually
Great.
third Thursday or so of every month. Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Thanks, Greco.
Thanks a lot.
See
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. See ya.